the right place right now because today we're talking about something that should make every American sit up and pay attention. And I mean, really pay attention because what's happening right now with Iran, Israel, and our government, it's giving me serious deja vu. The kind of deja vu that makes you wonder if we're all living in some kind of twisted Groundhog Day movie. You see, those headlines screaming at you from every news app on your phone: urgent, Tehran, evacuations ordered, breaking, Israel strikes hit Iran, Trump returns early from summit. Sound familiar? It should because we've been here before, folks, multiple times. Actually, the year was 2003. The boogeyman was Saddam Hussein. The magic words were weapons of mass destruction. And boy, did those three little words, WMD, change everything. Then it was 2011. It's a new boogeyman, Muammar Gaddafi. Same playbook, different country. Now it's 2025. New year, same story. Just swap out the names and boom, we're back in business. So grab your coffee, settle in, and let's take a deep dive into what I'm calling the WMD playbook 2.0, because that's what it seems like me. Because if we don't learn from history, well, you know how that saying goes. Um, it's, the headlines that should really scare you. All right, let's start. Let's just start with what's happening right now, and I mean right now, because this story is moving faster than a cat video going viral on TikTok. TikTok, not TikTok. TikTok. Um, picture this. It's a regular Tuesday morning. We're scrolling through your phone, probably procrastinating on that assignment you should be doing or going to work, whatever, when suddenly your news feed explodes. Trump cuts G7 summit short, rushes back to Washington. Okay, that's unusual. Presidents don't just bail on international summits unless something big is going down. Fighter jets repositioned to Middle East. Now we're talking. When the military starts moving chess pieces around the board, you know the game is getting serious. Then we have the USS Nimitz aircraft carrier headed towards Iran. Now, for most of you who don't speak Navy, let's talk about something. You have the carriers positioned around the world. They're basically, they give the president and other people lots of options. Now, you basically have China over there practicing or rehearsing, whatever you want to call, for the invasion of Taiwan. When you move carriers into the Med for this, it's pretty serious because you're diverting assets away from, you know, from China. Well, let me translate. That's about 90 aircraft and 5,000 sailors headed towards one of the most volatile regions on Earth. This isn't a friendly visit. Israeli and Iranian forces exchanged strikes for fourth consecutive day. 4 days straight. That's not a skirmish, people. That's sustained combat. Tehran residents told to evacuate immediately. When a capital city of 9 million people gets an evacuation order, that's not a drill. That's preparation for something very, very bad. But here's where it gets really interesting. Israeli officials request U.S. air support for strikes on nuclear facilities. Nuclear facilities. Remember that phrase. We're going to come back to it. And then the cherry on top of this terrifying Sunday: Trump. Iran is very close to nuclear weapon. Now, pause for a second. Take a deep breath because I need you to remember something important that happened just 3 months ago. In March of 2025, our Director of National Intelligence, that's Tulsi Gabbard, for those keeping track, testified before Congress. And what did she say about Iran's nuclear program? She said they were not actively building a nuclear weapon. Let me say that again because it's important. Our top intelligence official said Iran was not actively building a nuke, but our president is saying they're very close to having one. Somebody's not telling the truth here, folks. But wait, there's more. Like a bad infomercial, this story just keeps giving. Trump declares US knows where Iranian Supreme Leader Khamenei is hiding. Hmm, hiding. That's an interesting word choice, isn't it? Makes it sound like the leader of a sovereign nation is cowering under his bed instead of leading his country. Headlines: Trump demands Iran's unconditional surrender. Unconditional surrender. Those are fighting words. Those are the words you use when you're already decided the outcome you want. Now, if you're sitting there thinking, gee, Kevin, this all sounds vaguely familiar, congratulations. You've been paying attention to history class. Gold star for you, because we have absolutely, positively, 100% been here before. Now, history of urgent threats. See, time for a little trip down memory lane. And by memory lane, I mean the highway to hell that we've traveled multiple times in the past 2 decades. The Iraq Special 2003 edition. Picture this: it's 2003, flip phones are cool, Facebook doesn't exist yet, and America is still reeling from 9/11. Enter stage right President George W. Bush and his merry band of warhawks. The story they told us went something like this: Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction, chemical weapons, biological weapons, maybe even nuclear weapons. He's a clear and present danger to America and our allies. We must act now before it's too late. Secretary of State Colin Powell, a respected general and man with actual credibility, stood in front of the United Nations with little vials of white powder. This, he said, holding up what looked like sugar packets, represents the kind of biological weapons Saddam could unleash. It was theater, pure calculated theater designed to sell a war. Congress bought it, the media bought it, the American people bought it. We invaded Iraq in March of 2003. We overthrew Saddam Hussein. We spent over $2 trillion. We lost over 4,400 American soldiers. Hundreds of thousands of Iraqi civilians died. And you know what we found? Crickets. No weapons of mass destruction, none, zero, zilch, nada. Colin Powell later called his UN presentation a blot on his record. He was being kind. It was a disaster based on faulty intelligence that somehow everyone in power believed without question. Let's look at the Libya remix, 2011 edition. So we fast forward to 2011. New president, same playbook. This time the boogeyman was Muammar Gaddafi, Libya's eccentric dictator who'd been running that country since bell bottom jeans were fashionable. The story: Gaddafi is about to use chemical weapons on his own people. We have a responsibility to protect innocent civilians. This is about human rights, not regime change. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton was a star of this show. We came, we saw, he died. She famously said after Gaddafi was killed. NATO bombed Libya for months. Gaddafi was overthrown and brutally murdered. Libya, which had been a relatively stable, if weird country under its dictator, descended into chaos. And today, Libya is still a mess. It's got two governments, multiple warring factions, and has become a highway for human trafficking. Great job, everyone. Now, the Syria sideshow, 2013 through 2018. Syria was the trilogy nobody asked for: chemical weapons, attacks, red lines, moderate rebels who turned out to be not so moderate. We armed groups that we thought were the good guys. Some of those weapons ended up in the hands of ISIS. Whoops. We launched missile strikes. We sent special forces. We spent billions of dollars supporting a civil war that killed over 500,000 people and created the largest refugee crisis since World War II. And what did we accomplish? Syria is still run by Bashar al Assad. Russia expanded its influence in the Middle East. Iran strengthened its position, and millions of people are either dead or displaced. The pattern? Seeing a pattern here? Let me break it down for you. Identify the boogeyman, some foreign leader who's supposedly a threat to America or humanity. Create urgency. They're about to get use scary weapons or they're about to commit atrocities. Appeal to emotion. Think of the children. Think of our allies. Think of democracy. Dismiss skeptics. Anyone who questions the narrative is unpatriotic or naive. Launch military action, usually starting with limited strikes that expand into something much bigger. Mission accomplished. Declare victory while the region burns. Memory hole. Never mention it again. Move on to the next crisis. This isn't conspiracy theory stuff, folks. This is documented history. You can look it up. You can read the government reports, the congressional investigations, the leaked documents. We keep making the same mistakes because we keep falling for the same tricks. And right now, in 2025, the band is getting back together for another world tour. All right, let's look at the intelligence game. When spies disagree with politicians, here's where things get really interesting. And by interesting, I mean deeply concerning in a way that should make every American ask some hard questions. You remember Tulsi Gabbard, former congresswoman from Hawaii, former presidential candidate, current director of national intelligence. Love her or hate her. She's literally the person whose job it is to know what's really going on in the world. In March of 2025, she testified before Congress about Iran's nuclear program, and what she said was pretty clear. Iran is not actively building a nuclear weapon. Now, doesn't mean Iran is a bunch of peaceful hippies growing organic vegetables and singing kumbaya. They've got a nuclear program, they've got enrichment capabilities, and they've definitely been playing some games with international inspectors over the years. But there's a massive difference between having nuclear technology and actively building a bomb. It's like the difference between owning a kitchen knife and actively planning to stab someone with it. So when the president says Iran is very close to a nuclear weapon and our top intelligence official says they're not actively building one, Houston, we have a problem. This isn't some minor disagreement about trade policy or infrastructure spending. This is about war and peace. This is about whether American soldiers go to fight and possibly die in another Middle Eastern conflict. Now, the intelligence community's track record. Let's look at this. Now, before we get too comfortable trusting any government official, whether it's Gabbard or Trump or anyone else, let's remember that the intelligence community doesn't exactly have a perfect batting average when it comes to these situations. The CIA was convinced Saddam had WMDs. They were wrong. The intelligence community thought that the Taliban would hold Afghanistan for months. After we left, they lasted about 11 days. They've been surprised by everything from the collapse of the Soviet Union to 9/11 to the Arab Spring. So when I say we should pay attention to what Gabbard is saying, I'm not saying we should blindly trust her. I'm saying we should ask why there's such a massive disconnect between what our intelligence agencies believe and what our political leaders are claiming. The politics of fear. Here's the thing about fear, it's a hell of a drug. When people are scared, they stop thinking clearly. They stop asking questions. They start accepting things they would normally find completely unacceptable. After 9/11, Americans accepted warrantless surveillance, torture, indefinite detention, and a whole bunch of other things that would have horrified us in normal times. Why? Because we were scared. Fear makes you do stupid things. Fear makes you give up your rights. Fear makes you support wars that you normally oppose. And right now, there are people in Washington who really want to be afraid of Iran. They want you to picture mushroom clouds over American cities. They want you to imagine Iranian terrorists sneaking across our borders. They want you to believe that if we don't act now, something terrible is going to happen. But here's a question worth asking. If Iran was really on the verge of getting nuclear weapons, wouldn't our intelligence community be unanimous about that? Would there be no doubt, no disagreement, no conflicting assessments? When something is genuinely urgent and genuinely clear, intelligence agencies don't split on their assessment. They might disagree about what to do about it, but they don't disagree about whether it's happening. The fact that we're getting mixed signals should tell us something important. Either the threat isn't as clear as some politicians want us to believe, or there are people in government who are willing to exaggerate threats for political purposes. Neither of those possibilities should make you feel comfortable. Now, let's follow the money. Who gets rich when America goes to war? All right, time for everyone's favorite game, follow that money. Because when America goes to war, some people get very, very rich. And spoiler alert, it's probably not you. The defense contractor bonanza. Let's start with the obvious beneficiaries, defense contractors. These are companies that make everything from fighter jets to body armor to those little packets of crackers that come in military meals. When America goes to war, these companies hit the jackpot. Their stock prices go up faster than a SpaceX rocket, and their executives start shopping for bigger yachts. Let's take Lockheed Martin, for example. They make the F-35 fighter jet, which costs about $80 million per plane. When tensions rise in the Middle East and the Pentagon starts talking about needing more air power, guess whose phone starts ringing? Raytheon makes missiles, lots and lots of missiles. A single Tomahawk cruise missile costs about 1.4 million. That's more than most people will make in their entire lives, and we use them to blow up buildings in countries most Americans can't find on a map. General Dynamics makes tanks, ships, and submarines. Boeing makes everything from bombers to military helicopters. Northrop Grumman makes stealth fighters and drones. These companies employ millions of people and have factories in almost every congressional district in America. It's not an accident, it's a deliberate strategy to make sure that every member of Congress has constituents whose job depends on military spending. So when people or when someone in Congress suggests maybe we didn't need to spend 800 billion a year on defense, they get a visit from very polite, very well-dressed lobbyists to explain how many jobs would be lost in their district if their contract gets canceled. All right, the energy equation. Then there's the energy sector. Oil companies love Middle Eastern conflicts because they create uncertainty, and uncertainty drives up price. When Israel and Iran start shooting each other, oil traders get nervous. When oil traders get nervous, prices go up. When prices go up, oil companies make more money. It's that simple. During the Iraq War, oil prices more than doubled. ExxonMobil's profits hit record levels. Coincidence? You be the judge. And let's not just about the price of oil. Military conflicts create opportunities for American energy companies to secure contracts in countries where regime change has occurred. After Gaddafi fell in Libya, American companies were right there, ready to help rebuild the oil infrastructure. Funny how that works. All right, the reconstruction racket. Speaking of rebuilding, let's talk about what happens after the bombs start falling. Someone has to rebuild all the stuff we just blew up, right? Enter the reconstruction contractors. These companies specialize in rebuilding infrastructure in war zones. They get massive no bid contracts from the US government to fix roads, rebuild power plants, and restore water systems. The most famous example is Halliburton, which got billions of dollars in contracts to rebuild Iraq. Their former CEO, Dick Cheney, who just happened to be vice president when those contracts were awarded. Now, I'm not saying there was any corruption there. I'm just saying it's interesting how these things work out. The political payoff. War is also great for politicians, especially presidents. Nothing boosts approval ratings like a good old fashioned military operation against a foreign enemy. George W. Bush's approval rating shot up to 90% after 9/11 and stayed high through the early phases of the Iraq War. War makes presidents look strong and decisive. It unites the country behind the commander in chief. It changes the subject from domestic problems to foreign threats. And if you're facing an election, a little military action can be just the thing to remind voters that you're tough on America enemies. The Eric Prince warning. Now, you mentioned Eric Prince in the original script, and that's worth talking about. For those who don't know, Eric Prince is the founder of Blackwater. the private military company that made billions of dollars providing security services in Iraq and Afghanistan. Prince has been warning about what he calls the military industrial complex's influence on American foreign policy. He's not some anti war liberal. This is a guy who made his fortune from military contracts. But even he's saying that too many people in Washington have a financial interest in keeping America at war. Too many careers depend on having enemies to fight. Too many companies depend on having weapons to sell. Prince has also been critical of what he calls rhinos, Republicans in name only, who he claims are more interested in enriching themselves and their cronies than in actually serving American interest. Whether you agree with Prince's politics or not, his basic point is hard to argue with. When war becomes profitable, peace becomes a threat to people's bottom line. The real cost here, what all this means for you, the average American. First, you pay for it. Every bomb, every bullet, every $1 billion contract comes out of your tax dollars. That's money that could be spent on roads, schools, healthcare, or just left in your pocket. Second, you pay for it again when the economy suffers. War spending drives up inflation, destabilizes markets, and diverts resources from productive uses to destructive ones. Third, you might pay for it with your life or the love of someone you love. Because while defense contractors get rich off war, it's working class kids who do the actual fighting and dying. So the next time someone tells you we need to go to war to protect American interest, ask yourself, whose interests are we really protecting? Now, the media machine, how stories become truth. Let's talk about how a story becomes the truth in America today. Because the way information travels from government officials to your eyeballs is not as straightforward as you might think. The Breakfast Club of Power. Every morning in Washington, D.C., something interesting happens. Government officials, think tank experts, and journalists all read the same newspapers, watch the same TV shows, and go to the same cocktail parties. They form what we call the consensus. And once the consensus forms, it becomes very, very hard to challenge. Right now, the consensus is forming around Iran. The story goes something like this: Iran is a dangerous rogue state that's close to getting nuclear weapons. Israel is our democratic ally defending itself. We need to support them before it's too late. This story gets repeated on CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, and every other major news network. It gets written up in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal. It goes it gets discussed by experts on talk shows and podcasts. Pretty soon, it's not just a story, it's the story. It's the accepted truth that everyone agrees on. And if you question it, well, you must not be paying attention, or you must be naive, or must be unpatriotic, the language of war. Pay attention to the words being used in news coverage right now. They're not accidental. Evacuations instead of relocations, strikes instead of attacks, facilities instead of buildings, neutralize instead of kill, collateral damage instead of dead civilians. This is what we call sanitized language. It's designed to make war sound clean, precise, and necessary rather than messy, destructive, and optional. When you hear that Israel struck Iranian facilities, that sounds very different from Israeli bombed Iranian buildings, but they mean the same thing. When you hear about neutralizing threats, that sounds much nicer than killing people. But again, same thing. The media uses this language because government officials use this language. And government officials use this language because it makes their actions sound more acceptable to the public. The experts parade, turn on any news channel right now, and you'll see a parade of experts explaining why military action against Iran is necessary, justified, or inevitable. But here's a question worth asking: who are these experts and what's their background? Many of them are former government officials who were involved in previous Middle Eastern conflicts. Some of them work for think tanks that are funded by defense contractors. Others are retired military officers who now work as consultants for companies that profit from military spending. I am not saying all these people are corrupt or lying, but I am saying they have a certain perspective, and that perspective tends to favor military solutions to international problems. You rarely see experts on TV who think military action is a bad idea. You rarely hear from people who were right about Iraq being a mistake, or Libya being a disaster, or Syria being a quagmire. The experts who got it wrong keep getting invited back. The experts who got it right, they get ignored. You know, there's the social media echo chamber, and then there's social media, which has made the problem even worse. Your Facebook feed, your Twitter timeline, your TikTok for you, your, you know, they're all designed to show you content that confirms what you already believe. If you click on stories about Iranian threats, you'll see more stories about Iranian threats. If you share posts about supporting Israel, you'll see more posts about supporting Israel. The algorithm doesn't care about truth, it cares about engagement. And nothing drives engagement like fear, anger, and conflict. So the stories get amplified, repeated, and reinforced until it feels like everyone agrees with it, even if they don't. The dissent disappears. Here's what really is concerning: dissenting voices get marginalized or ignored entirely. Remember Scott Ritter? He was a UN weapons inspector who said before the Iraq war that Saddam Hussein didn't have WMDs. He was right, but at the time, he was dismissed as a publicity seeker or a conspiracy theorist. Remember the intelligence officials who questioned the evidence about weapons of mass destruction? They were ignored or reassigned. Today, if you question the narrative about Iran, you're likely to be dismissed as an Iran apologist or a foreign agent or someone who doesn't understand the complexities of the situation. The system is designed to suppress doubt and amplify certainty, even when certainty is unwarranted. The speed of news, there's always a simple fact that modern news moves incredibly fast. Stories break on Twitter before they're verified. Cable news channels fill 24 hours a day with talking heads who need something to talk about. In this environment, nuances dies, complexity gets lost, everything becomes urgent, everything becomes a crisis, everything demands immediate action. There's no time to step back and ask basic questions like, is this really as urgent as it seems? Are there other ways to handle this situation? What are the potential consequences of the actions being proposed? By the time those questions might get asked, we're already on to the next crisis. Your role in the story: here's the thing, you're not just a passive consumer of this information, you're part of the process. Every time you click on a headline, every time you share a post, every time you comment on a story, you're sending a signal about what kind of content gets attention. If you want more thoughtful and nuanced coverage of complex international situations, you need to seek out and support that kind of content. If you want media outlets to ask harder questions about government claims, you need to reward them when they do. And if you want to avoid being manipulated by propaganda, whether it comes from your own government or foreign governments, you need to be skeptical. Ask questions and seek out multiple perspectives, because the alternative is to sleepwalk into another war based on another set of claims that might turn out to be wrong. Now, Congress, the war powers. Well, you know, now here's something that might actually give you a tiny bit of hope in this whole mess. Congress is starting to wake up, and by wake up, I mean some members are remembering that they're supposed to have a say in whether America goes to war. The Constitution 101. Let's do a quick civics lesson here, because apparently this is something we need to remind people about every few years. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution gives Congress, not the president, the power to declare war. The founding fathers did this on purpose. They had just fought a war against a king who could drag his country into conflicts whenever he felt like it, and they didn't want to create another king. The president is the commander in chief of the military, but Congress controls the purse strings and has the authority to decide when American forces should be used in combat. That's the theory, anyway. In practice, presidents have been finding creative ways around this requirement for decades. They launch police actions instead of wars. They cite imminent threats that require immediate action. They claim authority under old congressional authorizations that were written for completely different conflicts. And Congress, for the most part, has been happy to let them do it because voting for war is politically risky. If the war goes well, the president gets the credit. If it goes badly, Congress gets blamed for authorizing it. Much easier to just let the president make the decision and then complain about it later. Well, the War Powers Resolution. Back in 1973, after the Vietnam War, Congress tried to fix this problem by passing the War Powers Resolution. This law requires the president to notify Congress within 48 hours of committing armed forces to military action and limits such deployments to 60 days unless Congress authorizes an extension. Sounds good in theory. In practice, every president since 1973 has basically ignored it. When it's convenient, presidents have argued that the War Powers Resolution is unconstitutional. They've claimed that their actions don't count as hostilities subject to the resolution. They've said that congressional authorizations from years of decades ago still apply to new situations. And Congress has usually gone along with it because challenging a president on war powers is politically dangerous. This time is different, maybe, but something interesting is happening right now. Members of Congress from both parties are introducing new war powers resolutions specifically designed to restrict President Trump's ability to take military action against Iran. This is significant for a few reasons. First, it's bipartisan. Usually, war powers fights break down along party lines, with the president's party supporting him and the opposition party opposing him. But right now, we've got Republicans and Democrats both expressing concern about potential military action against Iran. Second, it's preemptive. Usually, Congress only gets involved in war powers issues after military action has already started. This time, they're trying to prevent unauthorized military action before it happens. And then, third, it's specific. Previous war powers resolutions um, have